All right, we are live. Hey, good evening, everybody. Dave Wilson of the Ring of Hire Show. Hey, tonight I got a great guest, and Paul's been on the show before. He's a great author, and let me tell you about expert in human resources. And he's from Los Angeles, California, and we're going to go over a lot of great books. But Paul, how you doing tonight?
So happy to be here, Dave. I'm doing fine. Thank you.
I appreciate it, and we'll be right back after this video. Paul, that cost me $17.
Did it really? It's gorgeous.
I use the Fever app.
Really?
Yeah, and the gentleman, I've been with him for 2 years, and I don't know, it was dark 2019. It cost me $10. I give him $7 tip. He knows me so well with music, and I just come up with the images, and he's getting better, and I have some other ones. We're both developed together.
It's really impressive. The music is great. I mean, it's like, gosh, I want to be on a podcast is what it makes me think. So it's wonderful.
Paul, can you introduce yourself and tell everybody who you are and what you do? And
yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, my background is in human resources. I actually started my career in sales. I was a sales recruiter or, a headhunter. And I did that for about 6 years. And I became the director of training, which is director of sales training. And from there, I launched into human resources. And I've been fortunate. I worked as the head of HR for Nickelodeon. I was head of international HR for Paramount Pictures. Besides entertainment, I've also worked in healthcare, biotech, also financial services like private equity. So I've got a good feel for what's going on out there, whether it was international environments. I've worked in nonprofit. I've worked in union environments. So I've got a pretty good feel for the
That's a tough union environment. I've been there for 10 years in the manufacturing. And that's why I told you when I first on the show, and we're going to go over the books tonight, is where were you in the 90s? I told you before, because we didn't have it.
No, I'm with you. And the funny thing for me, Dave, too, is the writing was always a creative outlet. It was like my hobby. And where I was fortunate is I can turn my hobby into something that helped me in my career because I wrote about the stuff that happened to me during the day. But that's really, I started writing articles, then I started writing books. And with the new book series I have out, I'm now up to 15 books. So knock on wood, it's a lot of books. It's a lot of writing. So
it is, because I'm going to show some people. All right, this is what we're going to talk about tonight, everybody. New effective hiring, and it just came out March 1st. Right. I just got it off of Amazon, so we're going to talk about that. But now this is my favorite one. Everybody knows 101 top conversations with employees, my highest viewed shows. Next one, the 2,600 phrases. I love this. And I tell people, Paul, the reason I like these is not so much, it's the wording, how to word things. Because listen, I'm not the great in writing skills, but I've taken some out of here, and you really can make yourself sound really well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, wordsmithing was something I always enjoyed. It's a good exercise. And when the publisher, it was the American Management Association, and they said, we want a book on phrases. And they said, come on, Paul, how hard could it be? They're just half sentences. Well, the funny thing, Dave, as a writer, when you write, you're telling stories, there's narratives. Before you know it, you've written 25 pages. When you have to do half sentences over and over and over again, it was really a tough book to write. It wasn't as easy as it sounds, or at least as how they made it sound. But I'm glad it's doing well. That book has been translated into a number of languages, believe it or not. So it's cool.
It's kind of like I use Grammarly Professional, and we are not. Let's see. Let me take care of this, Paul. Here it says we're not. Remove. Let's see. Something's going on with the great length in here. Let's see if it comes right back on. There we go. Came back on. The point here is when I use Grammarly, right? because it really, and you learn the wording over and
right.
over constantly. And I'm like, this is what it reminded me of, because when you constantly are doing it on Grammarly and you're reading it here, it comes second nature over and over and over. So this one I like. The third best one. The third best one. Oh, look, you got cards here. And I've read, 96 great interview questions. And my take on this one, as you can see, all my cards here.
That's a lot of cards. Yeah.
Because but your questions here are, I don't know, it's just different. It's not the same old questions. And I like how when you ask the question, what you're looking for. There's two things that could happen when you ask that question, what you can expect back, like two different things. What made you, like, when you write something like that, what makes you do that? Like, just pops into your mind, says, I'm going to try to write a book on this.
No, it's funny because I was always very inquisitive. There's that natural curiosity that some people have, and I've been blessed with that. And I like to tell stories. But this was different because I wrote that book, the first edition. It's now in its third edition. And the editions are, it's usually every 10 years. If the book is still selling, they want a new edition. So knock on wood, that book came out. I wrote it in 1996. That's where the number is. But I've updated it now enough times that, it's still doing its thing, which is great. But the reality was, I learned the business as a headhunter. And as a headhunter, when you learn it, everything is like a deal in progress. You have to understand, like, where do the emotions go? How hard is it? When you're quote unquote selling people,
right?
They're the only product in the world that can refuse to be sold. The car doesn't say, I'm not going with these people. Did you see what their garage looks like? But the reality is, in the search business, you have to keep the client company happy. You also have to keep the candidate happy. And when you're talking about moving people across country and different types of things, there's a lot of moving elements.
Yeah.
Well, if you take that mindset and move it into human resources recruiters, there's an aha moment, because in the HR business, I hate to say it, but it's a little bit more like the fish jump in the boat.
Okay.
When you're on the search side, you got to go find the fish. And so
Right.
It's actually complementary. And that book was meant to do both sides of the desk, to understand what it's like to hire from the corporate perspective, but also understand that there are problems that can happen along the way that you need to be aware of. And that's from the headhunter side. So it's kind of a dual approach to the whole process.
And I like it. Like I said, I've got 20 of them in there.
Yes.
I use it at work too.
That's great.
I do. And
Good.
I've told you before, some of the questions can make you stop. But like you said, you want to make it easy. We're just talking about that. But they're just, I'm going to say it again, different. Not like you go to a typical interview and I mean, I understand, tell me about yourself and what you've done and all that. But this makes it just think about something for a minute there, and you got to give an example of it. And if you can't, then that just shows the difference. You could learn so much more in one person by asking certain questions like that.
Yeah, very true, Dave. You hit the nail on the head. I mean, there's an emotional intelligence that goes into this too.
Yep.
It's not meant to trick anybody. It's not meant to make people make a mistake or, oh, I caught you with a, it's really a matter of what is it that you're looking for? And does the opportunity that we have fit your career needs right now?
Right.
So I talk in there, for example, about your reason for leaving. Looking at people's reasons for leaving their various jobs, you can kind of see where their values lie. Are they a cork on the wave, or are they deliberate about how they choose their career?
Makes
and
sense.
The most important question is the reason you're leaving your current company fulfillable by coming to ours? Because if it's not, you're changing hats for the sake of changing hats. You're probably going to be gone in a year or 18 months. And nobody wants to put that much time into someone just to see them leave prematurely. So,
that's what I like when we get to the book here. This one here, see, I got them, Paul. I only got 7 though. I didn't realize you had many.
Don't worry, no pressure. No, you're doing fine just the way you are, Dave. I'm
the 75 ways managers hire, and again, I guess I like your books, you can tell, but I use them for personal growth. I told you about that. I use them to try to learn, because a lot of the stuff out there, I mean, you can watch the videos and everything, but I just like a book. I like to be able to write notes in it and look at it. This one, I'm only halfway through. So I'm only halfway through that one. It's a big one.
It's a little bit on the thicker side. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of things you can do to hire, develop, and keep great employees. And that's kind of the whole point of it. Different things work for different people, Dave. It's not a one size fits all, do A, B, and C, just as I've written it. The idea is these are concepts that I try and make them really personal. I try and make it sound like I'm sitting next to the person and talking to them, but I also want them to customize it. They have to make it their own. They can't take it from some third party.
Well, that's like when you said that, some of the stuff I read it and I'm like, I don't know if I agree with that, but then I'm like, it's okay. It's okay that I say that to myself. Well, I don't know if I do it that way, but you're giving a basic and majority. I like the ideas, but you don't always have to agree with everything you read on it.
Of course, that's right.
But it's going to make you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way I look at it.
Right.
This one was a good one. Hiring and firing. Anything with these words on a podcast are the best.
Isn't it? I know. It's funny when I look at my books and the various books I've written, the ones that tend to sell the best are the ones where there's a pain point involved.
Yeah.
So tough conversations or documentation, and how do I do that to structure terminations? Listen, they love hearing about how to motivate and develop and grow and coach. That's the good thing, but that's the visceral need is I need something and I need it now. Quick, get me that book. And so I think you'll see that the defense side, what I call leadership defense, tends to be a bigger pull than what I call leadership offense.
Right.
Not that leadership offense isn't important, but the defense tends to be where the pain is. And that's where people gravitate a little more quickly.
On that part. Paul, do you see yourself, even from all your experience of all the years of HR, are you still learning?
Oh, are you kidding? I'm the first one to sign up, and I'm in the front row when it comes to going to training things. I have never sat back for a day and said, oh, I already know this stuff. It would be short-sighted, but you can tell from my writing. It's like, I'm interested. I'm curious. I love to hear different opinions. And one of the things for me, Dave, one of the reasons why I was deliberate about how I built my career is I wanted to work across various industries and different sectors to kind of get a feel for what are the differences out there, because my work typically informed my writing. So it's all one big, you can say harmonious, aligned thing, or you can say it's a hodgepodge, whatever you like. But I did enjoy that, seeing how different organizations do things differently.
Well, I like how you put the book is for everyone. Today, and when we go over this effective hiring at the entry level, there was entry level, middle management, and your upper management, in the salary ranges. But the book was for everyone, especially on the effective hiring one.
And it's supposed to be. Everyone should be able to get something out of it. I don't sit back and say this is only for senior executives, because that's kind of silly. And actually, it's a small audience, where the base of the base of the pyramid is going to be your newly minted managers and your people moving up through the management director, VP ranks. So that's kind of the primary target audience. But it should make sense for someone who's taking a class in college.
Right.
So it kind of needs to go across the whole spectrum.
All right. Well, that brings me to this last book before we go over the effective hire. Let me get a scale.
Oh, that one. Yeah.
Wow. I'll tell you.
Yeah.
I still go back and look at it for 101 sample write-ups for documented employee performance. And what I like about it is how you're putting in there, for an example, when I was looking at it tonight, now see, I got to turn the pages where I see it, what I was going to say. You put on there, for everything from policy procedure violations, behavior, performance, but then you give a format of how you can write it up. And I look at this as like I tell my friends that have a smaller business, dude, if you have a small business, this is worth its weight in gold, because they don't know, my friend in HVAC, he doesn't have everything on that, but this is something that he could utilize for his employees.
Yeah. And the funny thing about that one, you should see the Chinese version. It's the same book, but it's all written in Chinese, which blows me away. It's very flattering as an author. But the reality is, if you don't know how to structure the documentation, it can come back and bite you big time. Right. And the reality is, even human resources people, if you're an HR person, you didn't necessarily study employee and labor relations. You may be doing comp and benefits and recruiting and those other things, but you need to know how to do that. And so when I was learning it myself, I was reading all the books that were out there, and they were all written by lawyers, and they were all legal theory. And in the footnote, if you were lucky, in one particular chapter, you can see a little bit of an example of what was actually written. I turned the paradigm on its head. I wanted the stars of the show to be the write-ups. And in the footnotes at the bottom, I've got some legal stuff. You know what I mean? But that's what I needed. I always wrote to what my need was. And I still refer to my books. People look at my books on my bookshelf and they're like, these are highlighted, underlined, circled. There's no, you highlight your own books. And I'm like, actually, yeah, I kind of do, because I need them. I still use my books to this day. So.
You have to. And the reason I tell other recruiters and staffing people is, things have changed so much to where I believe as a supervisor, even management, you are kind of HR too, because if you don't know, the couple things that I've read in this book that I try to tell people, don't do that. Don't do that. because by learning that, you're going to save the company money in the long run, because if it's something that you shouldn't be doing, you're going to get called out on it, and then it goes to HR, and then it gets,
blown out of
right
proportion.
from there.
Yep. Yeah.
You know, and that's the part there that I learned from it. Say, don't be saying that. Don't be saying it,
Well, and you bring up a good point, because the funny thing for me is, as an HR guy, what I always wanted to do when I was new in a company is train the managers. Yeah. My idea was, if I can train the managers, it's just going to make my job easier. If they're thinking ahead, it's a WWPD, right? What would Paul do? If I can get them to understand that part of it when I'm newer in my career at a particular company, of course it's going to make my job easier, because I get a chance to let them walk a mile in my shoes, but hopefully I'm also giving them the tools that they need, so that by the time they come to me, it's an informed recommendation. They've thought it through. It's not willy-nilly, which unfortunately does happen in a lot of organizations these days. So.
All right, well, I got one easy question for you. Do you ever get stunned on a question of like, I don't know?
Yeah, it can happen. It doesn't happen all the time. I'm sure it happens, of course. It can happen. And I'll be the first one to admit it. It's like, it's okay. I'm not the, what was it, the shell answer man or what? I'm not that. Right. So, if they can stump me, they stump me. It's good.
And the reason, like I said, everybody, effective hiring, and I got it. And I'll tell you, I want to go over a couple of questions on some of the chapters here. And it's a really, listen, it's a quick read. I like it because, you could have it done within 2 days. But if you take your notes, it's, you can write some serious notes on this of what to learn from it. And the first thing I was looking at is, it said your first part of it was progression through the ranks. And that word progression to me is, I didn't hear of that years ago. It wasn't that word progression. Why is it a good thing when you're doing interviews like that, progression through the ranks when you're interviewing somebody, by utilizing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. The context I use it in, for me, Dave, has always been, what are my criteria? If I had 4 criteria to select a candidate, I like longevity. I like progression through the ranks. Of course, I'm always looking for technical skills, because you want them to hit the ground running as much as you can. And then there's always that personality match, the X factor, or whatever you want to call it. But the idea of progression through the ranks, people tend to assume greater responsibilities over time in their career when they're career minded. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're in a job for 10 years and doing the same thing, or 20 years or 30 years, that it's bad.
Right.
That's fine. But I tend to kind of gravitate myself towards people who find new ways of reinventing themselves. And that oftentimes shows itself in terms of their career progression. So I tend to like that. My caveat at the beginning is, these are my 4 criteria. They're not necessarily yours, but I want to show you that these are the kinds of questions that I use to ferret out what's important to me. And when you determine what your criteria are, you can select your own, and hopefully the book will help you do that.
And that is, and you said exactly, because you said here, if you're in a role for 8 years, what I like about that is the question was then, it was, how has your role changed over the years, and how you have reinvented a job like that. So you could turn that around with somebody. And like you said, if they're in the job for 10 years, they're happy with that, that's fine. But you could still, if they were to leave that job or something like that, you could utilize that question just to build them up. Like, it's okay, but what did you learn? Is that where you're?
Yep. You hit the nail on the head. The idea being is, sometimes if you ask someone, walk me through your progression in your career, leading me up to what you do now on a day-to-day basis. I've had candidates who looked at me and were like, Paul, I don't know if I understand your question. I've been a staff accountant for the last 20 years. You want to have a nice way to kind of gently say, oh, no, that's great. That's fine. All right. So let me ask the question to you this way. And then you can move off into, tell me how your job has changed, or tell me how you've progressed in your own role, because your role and your company have changed. And you'll have people answer things like, oh, okay, now I get it. Well, I've had 16 bosses in the last 8 years. And all of a sudden they have a chance to talk. And I want to make sure that everyone feels, it's inclusive. It's like, I'm asking that question because a lot of times candidates don't necessarily show it on their resume.
Right.
It kind of brings it out when you ask it. But even if they didn't, it's okay. I want to have a nice way to kind of move them in a direction to say, tell me why you're proud of how you've been able to do in your career up to now. Right. What are some of the challenges you faced?
That's what, like, I look at my father, when he was in the paper industry for 40 years, he did all kinds of jobs. I came out of the military to be his boss in the mill. And I looked at my dad, and it was like, I was thinking of that about that question. And I was like, what would he say? And he was content with working on he just did different jobs,
right.
but he was content where he was at. And I don't know that generation there. I don't think have to worry about interviewing so many now. That's pretty much gone.
Yeah.
You know?
No, but I agree with you, Dave. My dad was the same. And so
Yeah.
it's funny how we filter these questions and the responses through the people that are closest to us in our lives.
Right.
Because I always think the same way. It's same exact. What would my dad say in a situation like this? And how can I reinvent that question or ask it a different way so that he can have pride in his answer? Because it's still very telling. Again, like I say, I'm not trying to trick anyone. I just want to get behind the hype. The interview hype. When a candidate says to me, Paul, I normally don't say this in an interview, but then I know I've got the real person.
Yep.
They're like, they trust me enough to make themselves vulnerable. And I've only met them 30 minutes ago, but that's a real bond for me. And that's when I talk about, what's that personality match? When people can do that with me and be honest and, open and transparent, I love it because it tells me they've got a lot of self-confidence.
It's exactly what we were just saying there when I answered it about my dad. I probably would have said that's what came to my mind. So I probably would have answered it with something like that. And I like how the conversation goes to the next to get to know the person. And that's where a lot of things here. This next one was to me, I get asked a lot. And I know when you're talking about the technical skills and education. And if you're a recruiter and you don't have that, like if I was going to interview for IT, I don't know about IT. I really don't. And for anybody, even nursing, medical, could I find people? Probably. But I would have to be, and you said it right here, you have to be transparent. I've interviewed people for higher roles, and I would be honest with them, say, listen, I really don't know the position. I have a job description, but I like how it's okay to be honest to the person about that.
Yeah, I think so too. I hired bench scientists, PhD microbiologists. I've hired, all these different kinds of investment bankers. I'm Italian. I grew up in Brooklyn. What do I know from these people? I didn't grow up around that. So, you figure it out as you go through it, but the transparency is there. And I'll usually tell them, tell me why this job would make sense for you in terms of your career progression, but do me a favor. I'm a layman. Okay. I did take a class in high school. I think it was my sophomore year. I took biology. That's kind of where it ended. So if you can kind of explain this to me in my own terms, it'll help me be able to articulate it to our hiring manager.
Into that.
People are always willing to help with that. They want to teach. And even in an interview, it gives them a great opportunity to do so. But they also feel like there's more of a bond because there's nothing worse than a recruiter who's trying to snow you and tell me about your experience on the blah, 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 when I don't know what I'm talking about. And they'll figure it out by the questions I ask.
And that makes
be honest. Yeah,
it is. And again, for everybody's watching with Paul here on effective hiring, it's one of his great books. And also he's on LinkedIn. So you can see Paul Falcone, go to LinkedIn. That's how I met him. This one here, when I was looking at your personality match, X Factor and all this, prior to that, when people ask interviews, to rank yourself 1 to 10, and I know in the book here, you said how people, and it makes sense, probably say 6, 7, 8. Do you agree with the ranking systems like that, 1 to 10, and how, if I'm asked that, I do say the same thing. Well, I'd like to say I'm a 10. I'm the best at what I do. But if you go too high, I don't know. It's just like you don't know what the other person's thinking.
Yeah, it's true. And it isn't meant to be a trick question. When I use it in an interview, it's usually when I'm interviewing someone who is way above my pay grade. And I tell them, I'm not a microbiologist, so go easy for me. But when I ask them from a technical skill standpoint, in terms of your understanding of this job, where would you grade yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being you're a perfect match? I do want to hear where they go, Dave. Personally, I don't want to hire a 10. And I won't hire an 11 or a 12. And I'm not kidding. That's the vice president who was a vice president and is now interviewing for a manager job. That's not a good fit. That's not going to work. You were managing this job 2 tiers below you for a long time. But I've been through some tough markets in 2008 and 2000. I remember what it was like with people trying to just find work. But you can't do that. You can't overhire. On the other hand, on the flip side, if someone, I can tell enough that if they're a 60% match or less, I don't think that's necessarily a good zone either.
Right.
Ideally, I'm looking for that 70 to 80% range. I want them to know enough that they can make a meaningful contribution right from the beginning, but I also want them to have a learning curve. I want them to have something that's going to be the glue that binds them to the company, helps them build their resume and their LinkedIn profile. That to me is what makes it exciting. Not been there, done that. So that's kind of how I use that 1 to 10 scale.
And that makes sense, sir, when you say it like that too. One other question I wrote here. This is almost something similar to this, but I get a lot of questions to experience versus education. Do you get asked that a lot, to where people, like, even on LinkedIn and everything, everybody's talking about, well, they want 10 years experience or they want a bachelor's degree. I don't have it, but you have 10 years experience. Do you get asked that a lot? And how can you explain that to an employer if you're in that situation?
Yeah, it's a balance. I like it when an employer says they're looking for a degree or they're looking for X years of experience. That's okay with me. I would rather have that than degree mandatory.
Okay.
Now, in certain situations, you got to have a degree in whatever it is, or you need an MD or a PhD or a JD or whatever. And I get that. That's not what I'm talking about here. But the idea is an employer that's open enough to say, we value the education. 4 years of college, we actually look at as like 4 to 6 years of work experience. So, there's learning curve involved, but the reality is we know that you've got the stick to itness, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, when you're in a situation like that as an applicant, I think you can say, I don't have the degree. I did take certain studies, but I'd like to focus more on my experience because I feel like I'm very qualified for the job. So if the candidate moves me in that direction, I'm very comfortable with that. But again, that's assuming that they have to have the particular degree. And there are companies and there are circumstances where a degree is mandatory. You just kind of have to work with that.
That's just the way it is.
Yeah.
When I looked at the chapter here about maximizing your recruitment resources in the book, there was 4 different ones you talked about, and the direct hires and the RPOs, the layoff. Are they still utilizing headhunters to come in and companies to find people work? Or is that kind of thing of the past?
Outplacement firms? Outplacement
Years ago, we had that years ago. And I remember that whenever a manager, anybody got let go, they always found somebody to work for you. I wasn't sure if that's still going on as much now.
It is. The industry has changed. And I think it's fair to say most people in the industry would say in the last 10 years, it's gotten smaller. But a lot of industries have gotten smaller. But the reality is there's still big names out there, from Right Management to to Lee Hecht Harrison. There's been mergers that went on in that industry too. So a lot of them are consolidated. That used to be separate organizations are now part of these bigger ones. And there are newer firms too that are coming on to the scene that do a lot of that stuff virtually. So what they were saying is, again, I know it's maybe not ideal, but the reality is I'm in Los Angeles and you're in Philadelphia and I can still help you. So yeah, it's still there. It's still there. And I think it's still an important resource. I like to offer it if there's ever a layoff, because it gives people someone to talk to. It gives people the structure they need to kind of reinvent themselves and start over again. So yes, I'm a big fan.
And I like that you gave 4 different options. I did like on the special note here on the book how, and with diversity, it makes common sense how you put in here. I didn't even know this. And if you get the book, everybody can look. diversityjobs.com, latinojobs.org, over50jobs.com. That's me. disabilityjobs.net, blackcareers.org, asianhires.com, native jobs, LGBT job site, veterans, we hire women. I didn't realize that they have companies that are doing that now.
Yeah, these are boutique websites. And one of the things that people say to me a lot in today's market is, where do we find candidates? There's no candidates, right? It's either the great resignation, or for people our age, they call it the gray resignation, where a lot of people are feeling like, I don't want to do what I've been doing. Life is too short. And if I learned anything from coronavirus, it's like, I don't want to keep doing this anymore. The reality becomes you have to be very creative and you have to reach out to these resources because A, it's the right thing to do, but B, you've really got to expand beyond some of the big job boards out there. And I think this is a smart way to do it.
It was. And I was like, all right, whoa, I didn't even know that. It's because what I like about the book, again, everybody, is because it's right there, right in one page. I'm like, okay, that's going to give me an idea. And I'm thinking, all right, you want to fill jobs, like you said, there's a chance to go right there and look at the organizations. The next one, it talked about direct sourcing and, going on LinkedIn, trying to find people. The thing that I found, I was like, I like your one paragraph here. You were talking about, I consider risky bold, you were receptionist acting as a screener gatekeeper, and you were calling them in there to try to find people for a job for that you were hiring, correct?
Yep.
And then the letter that it says, my name is Paul Falcone and I'm the manager of the finance. If you do it correctly, that might work.
Well, I did it correctly. I mean,
did
yes, it does. Now, again, remember, when I was in the search business, you had to learn how to do direct sourcing, is what they call it.
Yeah.
In human resources, you don't do that, but there's no reason you shouldn't. And even if you're not in human resources, build a network of your peers. You should know people at other organizations. And if you don't, this gives you a great reason to reach out. If I were to call you, Dave, and say, Dave, I'm looking for a financial analyst, and you and I have the same role, we're both controllers. Yeah, I'd be happy to return the favor, but for now, do you know anyone in your network? Is there anyone who might be interested in coming over to talk with us? And at the end of that phone call, you'd say, hey, would you like to get together for a cup of coffee or lunch? Because we're both in the same town. We're both in the same discipline. Build your network wisely. This gives you a great opportunity to reach out to your peers. So if you know 3, 4, 5 controllers at competing organizations or local organizations, you've got your own network built up. It's just smart strategy. As a recruiter, what I used to try and do is bring my clients together for lunches, because my thought was, if I can introduce them to one another, they'll always remember me as the guy who brought them together and introduced themselves. So actually, direct sourcing is really just networking, but talking to people who sit in your same chair at other companies and hopefully making a relationship out of it.
And that's what I like, again, about the way you wrote. I mean, anybody wants to put a perfect paragraph. I was like, okay, hi, Dave. My name is Dave Wilson, But again, what I'm learning from this and the books here is it's the wording. It all comes down to how you're saying it or what you're saying in a way, and you can really, learn. And so if anybody wants to read that. The next part, I had a couple more pages here I want to ask you about. Hiring in your own image. Can you, I've read it and everything like that, but I'm trying to think, sound tips as well as cautionary tales. It's not about hiring somebody you like within that first 10, 15 minutes, right?
Correct.
And that's what a mistake that you see.
Correct. You've read the book well. You're getting all the main points out of it. I'm very impressed. So what would happen, Dave, is I would be the HR guy. I'd do the interview and I'd introduce the person to the hiring manager. And 5 minutes later, they're back in my office and the hiring manager's like, I love him. And I'm like, you love him? Did you even ask the guy to sit down in your office? You didn't even have time to walk down the hallway. Managers jump to these conclusions too quickly based on an immediate sense of likability. Now, don't get me wrong, likability is important, but more important than that is compatibility. And you have to take out the time to interview someone and ask questions to make sure you've got competitive business styles. Now, if it turns out that you do, and you also love this person personally, you've got the X factor happening, which is that personality match. But you can't do it just based on the fact that we like each other and we have Chicago Cubs in common. That's not enough. You've really got to make sure you're talking about structure. You're talking about direction, feedback, the pace the person works, the hours the person works, their ability to accept constructive criticism. I mean, you need to talk to them about those things. And where it ties in real well is you're asking those questions and you're asking them to grade themselves. But those turn out to be great questions to ask a reference. So when you move to the reference checking stage at the end, you're going to bounce the ideas off of a prior supervisor or 2 or 3 to get a feel to make sure that those answers are really the answers that you were hoping they were.
And that makes sense, because when I want to talk to you about at the end there about the onboarding and keeping people, how you talked about the 30, 60, 90. And if you don't do all this right here by reaching into it or deep diving, then that's going to fail. Because I've done that, to be honest with you. I've walked out of an interview before saying, wow, this person's great. Wow, they know everything that we do. And then a month later, they didn't know what they were saying.
Yeah. You get the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, right? That's why if you understand my career trajectory, it was recruiting and it went into employee relations, because you have to know how to hire them. But forgive me for saying, you also have to know how to fire the ones that aren't a good fit. And sometimes no matter what you do, you make what I call high probability hires, right? They've got a great background, great resume, right education, good personality match, excellent references. And then they come in and you're like, wow, I did not see this coming. It's a high probability hire. It has a greater chance of it sticking, but sometimes it don't. And the reason, Dave, is because people are people, and the person may not be in the same place in their mind or in their life that they were for the last 10 or 15 years. So, you have to know to do both. And that's been the trajectory of my writing too. It started with how to hire them, and it moved over into knowing how to have the tough conversations and the discipline and the terminations.
That makes sense. And they're the kind of things, again, that I just like reading about. The next one, the telephone screening. I get asked this from people too. And I've had before, when I was looking for employment, it seemed to be a bigger thing now. Hey, let's talk to you on the telephone first. It was like 10 minutes. And I was like, I got off, like, I'm thinking, what the heck just happened? I've never had them as much. And I was like, is this something new? How did you just learn so much? And then, but I mean, I guess it's important to do, and it makes sense, but it also, you talked about candidates' core qualifications, and how do you get all that information in 10 minutes?
The funny thing is, the way I've always trained this stuff was, you know what your job description really needs, right? You got a job description and it says they need to have X amount of experience in such and such a software, doing such and such level of responsibility, overseeing a team of blah, blah, blah. Those become kind of your core issues. Now, up to recently, you'd also want to screen for salary. You can't ask them salary history anymore, but you are allowed to ask them what their salary expectations are. If your job is an $80,000 to $85,000 a year job and they want $250,000, don't bother bringing them in.
Right.
And then so it's like pulling on their teeth a little bit, but you're just making sure that they've got everything that is considered a key hiring requirement, and that nothing really is missing. So,
well, everybody talks about the salary. It's always the first thing. Everybody's like, well, the salary. And I get that. Is it good to, when you have let's just say $90,000 a year job, you could actually give a minimum and a maximum. Like, you don't have to explain. You don't really want to say exactly what it is, because you want to have that little bit of a leeway, right? I mean, it makes common sense, right?
Yep.
This way, if a person, like you said, right up, they want 100,000, it's not going to pay that. And I guess it pays to be honest. Would you ask that earlier within the first minute or at the end?
Yes, in the screening interview.
Okay.
Believe it or not, that's one of the key factors. And the way I've always said it was, Dave, I'm not limiting you to anything. I just kind of want to get a feel for ballpark, because I don't want to waste your time. And I want to make sure that we're kind of in the right zone. So I know I can't ask you what your current salary is or what your history has been, but can you give me a little bit of a feel for the range you're looking for?
They do ask that? You're not allowed to ask that now?
Depends on certain states. In certain states, they put it in that you're not allowed to ask. In other states, they're now mandated that you must post the salary range for a job.
Okay.
And again, the intention is to blind the scales of the compensation history, so that you can pay more fairly to people, which I understand in theory. The problem becomes it doesn't work all that well in reality, because you may be making more than someone else, but you've got a higher level degree, or you went to a different level school, so it's not exactly right. And then the candidate hears it pays 90 to 120.
Right.
What is the candidate here? 120. What does the company want to pay? 90. You're upside down. It's called the law of inverse gravity. You're in the wrong zone just getting off the bat, because if you offer them anything less than the max of that range, they think you're cheap. And so it solves certain things, but it just kind of, when you squeeze on a balloon, it pulls, but it gets bigger down the end. It just passes off to another problem. But I understand where the intention is. It's a good intention. It just doesn't necessarily work out on a practical basis. All that.
And that makes. I've learned through what's working for me right now is, a lot of people say I'm crazy, and I don't care. Is when it comes to with middle management, I like to try to sell the job first anymore, because when you look at the jobs, it says $90,000 a year. They don't read anything else below it. They'll read a little thing, but then they're going to come in and say, hey, what are the benefits? What's intrigued? So I try to really talk about the company, really what's good about it. Your bullet points. Then I try to keep the salary down either below, or I don't put it on certain jobs. And the reason, because I want that communication. And if they see that culture, and right now around here, it's always money. But then again, if you find some companies, they don't have a hard time filling it, because they got great culture. They do great things for their employees. And a lot of them don't see that. They just look at the money, and when they're paying 90% of your healthcare and you didn't read that, it's like, that's just something that I've been trying, and it's been working for me in a little bit, because, wow, you have this, you have that, they're break rooms. People love break rooms out here. They're putting arcades in the break rooms around.
Right.
And
Right.
I'm
Ping
like,
pong
"Ooh,
tables.
it,
Yeah.
it is.
It does. It makes a difference. No, but you're absolutely right. And I think a lot of people would agree with your approach. I just want to quickly give you the headhunters counter argument. What really tends to sell is the company.
Right.
People join companies. I always tell people, spend time in your advertising describing what makes your company unique,
Right.
whether it's ping pong tables or anything else, because that's usually the main driver that attracts people. They want to be part of a winning team. The job itself is interesting. The people they're going to work with is interesting. The benefits are, there's a lot of other stuff. But if I had to put my money on one thing when I write my recruitment advertising, I'd be really focusing on what makes my company unique and special.
And it seems, I didn't hear that back years culture. I didn't hear all those words. It was just like, hey, you went to work. What do you mean? It just wasn't like that.
Sure,
I had two more else I could spend hours on. This is the one I like. This one and the last one here is the emotionally intelligent interview. And I liked what you said. It's kind of like a podcast in the beginning. You mean it's like, okay, get to know the person a little bit, icebreaker, like an icebreaker. Talk about something, then go into it instead of like, hey, Dave, how are you? Then right off the bat, tell me about yourself, and then talk right about the job immediately. I like how you broke it down to try to get to know the person a little bit.
Yeah, my feeling is that, too many times employers jump right into the Q&A.
Yeah.
And the way I explain it is the relationship isn't ready for that yet. Yep. If you sit me down and the first thing you say is, hi, Paul, give me an example of a time when you've done, because I've had that happen. I've had it on the receiving end. I know what it's like to be an applicant and hear that. You're not giving me a chance to like let my hair down, feel comfortable, trust you, make myself vulnerable to you, but vulnerable in a healthy sense. Spend a little time with me. I'm not asking for a lot of time, but if 3 to 5 minutes is just spent on where's Paul Falcone and why would this make sense for him? And Paul, tell me some of the other things that are going on out there because I'm not in the job market. What are you seeing out there? What it's like? Those are things that get people talking, and they innately just build trust. They build confidence because they're selfless questions. And that falls, Dave, under that selfless leadership category. People respond to that very, very well over and over again. And
that's what I took from that, because I was like, it makes sense. Instead, okay, I don't even know you, and it just made sense to me. Again, I got a couple more questions for Paul here, everybody. Effective hiring, please, right on Amazon. You can order all you want, all 12, right? And the series coming. The last part I just wanted to go over real quick in 22 is all that is the onboarding and how you went from there. The onboarding day 30, 60, and 90. And when I read them, it made total sense because you were just, if you don't do it, let me back that up. I don't think a lot of companies are doing it because I haven't done that. And I believe that's my mistake is to where, because that first 30 days, they're getting to know the job. Like you said, you get to know the people, you're spending your time, but that 60 to 90 is when you should be productive. And if you don't ask all those questions in between, that's where you said the fall off was.
Yeah. And especially, that premature turnover in the first 90 days or in the first 6 months is really what we call regrettable turnover because it's really hard. You spend so much time finding these people. Here's a scoop. And this is honestly what works for me, but I think is very easy to map out because it's very little energy or time on your part, but a great return on investment.
Right.
Meet with them at day 30. You call the meeting, right? If you're their boss, you can do it. If you're the HR person, you can do it. If you're the department head, you can do it. But spend time with them, just finding out about how they're doing. Do you need anything? Is this what your expectations were? Is there anything we can do differently to support you? You establish that at day 30 and just listen. It's a 15-minute meeting or a 20-minute meeting. It doesn't even last a half hour. Do it again at day 60. How are you doing in terms of facilitating, blah, blah, blah. Tell me about who's the most helpful to you or, who's gone out of their way. Cause I'm thinking, who are my, my stronger performers. Cause those are the best managers. Okay. But where I'm really heading is day 90. Day 90, what I want to do is I'm going to listen. I'm going to see where they're doing. But then I tell them, okay, day 90 is a fulcrum, so to speak. It's a launching pad.
Right.
Because what we're going to do is we're going to start, Paul, in 90-day increments. So starting at your 6th month, we're going to do it at your 9th month. We're going to do it at your 12th month. I want you to set time on my calendar. And I want you to tell me how you're doing towards your goals. I want you to tell me about How are you doing productivity wise? Is there any place we need to pivot? Do we need to amend those goals? But I really want you to focus on achievements. I want you to think about codifying your accomplishments, whether it's in terms of increasing revenue, decreasing costs, saving time. And I want you to work with me like literally like we're helping to build out your resume or helping to build out your LinkedIn profile or helping to build out your self-review when it comes time for your annual performance review, to talk about what you're doing to really make this organization a better place. They do all the work. They set it on the calendar. They come to me and they ask me for guidance, and I get to play coach and mentor. And they love it. You have to remember, especially the Gen Y and Gen Z, the 35 and under, these are the two most studied cohorts in world history. And we know what they want. And in the top 5 in study after study, they want career and professional development. Just making space for them to come and talk to you and making them know it's safe to do so and putting yourself in the role of coach and mentor, you check off all those boxes and it builds real rapport and real trust. And that's what you're trying to do with your new hires anyway. So,
and I think that makes sense because I had at work, when I've gone up a couple of employees, I do have done that, maybe not at 30-90, but then when they've told me things like, I'm like, wait a minute, I didn't know they were doing that, in the job. What do you mean? Who said you had to do this? So wait a minute here. I didn't know that. So there were the things that if somebody's not telling the recruiter or anybody what's going on, you don't know. What do you mean they changed your shift 2 weeks in? I didn't. I don't know why they don't want to tell me that, but that's sometimes what happens, and I feel that when I hear that, because I can see it when they're talking that they're not too happy about it.
Yeah. And the funny thing, all I'm saying, there's no work here. It's just allow the time and make the space for them to come and talk to you. And you put yourself in that role of being a great boss. It doesn't happen often enough. I've always sort of scratched my head thinking, why aren't companies do this? This is a horse sense. But I can see in the eyes of the people that I've taken the time to meet with. In my case, if I'm a VP of human resources and I've got directors and managers underneath me, but I'm going to meet the staff generalist and I'm going to meet the HR business partner and I'm going to meet the manager or whatever, it's a skip level meeting, right? It's not their boss they're meeting with, it's the department head. But I'm interested. I care. That tells them a lot about the organization. It really does. And it gives them an extra bond and it gives them someone else who they feel like has their back and is in their corner. It tends to pay great dividends. It really does.
It does. Because with HR, I've told you before, HR still scares the living hell out of me.
I love the honesty.
Like somebody tells me it does, because they're never calling me, hey Dave, you're doing a great job. Right. It's always something. All right, what did I say or what did I do? But when it comes to that, like you said, I know human resources HR is busy too, but I wish sometimes they would get more involved with employees on the floor. Take that time. Like you said, I learned a lot from one of the great managers at Home Depot, and he called it managing by wonder. So every morning, it didn't matter. He walked the floor around the whole process within that first 35, 40 minutes. And he told me, Dave, I know every single thing that's going on for that day because he just talks to everybody. Yep. Goes around, and every day you knew it.
Yeah, MBWA, management by walking around. And it's so important. Best boss I ever had, real quick, Dave, was Mark Taylor, who's the general manager and senior VP at Nickelodeon. He ran Nick. Everybody wanted to work for Mark Taylor. And he was a legend in the industry because total open door, walking around all the time, knew everybody at that studio by name. And it's Mark. He was a concept. He was a brand. He was all this stuff. CEOs can do this. It doesn't have to only be, department heads or managers and directors and VPs. CEOs can do this very easily, but it all depends on what's the perception you're looking to create. And if the perception is, I care, it's going to have to be personalized, and it's going to mean you have to get out of your office, as difficult as that can be sometimes. And you've got to dedicate that time to walking around so that people, they're expecting to see you. It's not just it's a surprise, but it's like, oh yeah, here comes Dave. And hey, good morning, Dave. That kind of thing. So. You looked forward to it, because if you wanted to say something, that was the time to say it. But, Paul, I want to thank you again so much. I'm going to go over your books here again real quick, and for taking the time with me. I enjoy it. And again, everybody, Effective Hiring, that's out now, March 1st. That's going to be a 1 of 5, you said? 1 of 5. It's called the Paul Falcone Workplace Leadership Series, and it's published by HarperCollins. Yeah. And I strongly recommend this for someone. It doesn't matter what level. It's just a really good read to take notes.
and I'm going to say it. I got to show them, Paul. 101 sampled. It's a great sales part, but I get a lot. Look, hire and firing. Everybody's going to love this book. I'm telling you. You know how to hire and fire people. 75 ways for managers to hire, develop. My best one. You're going to know all that one. Interview questions. I'll tell you what, they're not going to want to be interviewed by me. You know?
Yeah, you're armed and ready.
They see that. They're like, whoa, I don't even understand some of them at first. I had to read them like 3 times. I'm like, all right. I love this one again, the 2,600 phrases. And my favorite of all times, it gives me the highest views shows, is Tough Conversations with Employees. But, you know, you can reach out to Paul. You know, he's right on LinkedIn, everybody. That's how I found him. You know, when I saw the books, and, you know, Amazon has them all. I wish I still had my company, Paul, because I could write them off.
Yeah, that's right. Of course.
I could write off his training material. But if you want to, you know, Paul, thank you so much. And if you'd like to just take it on out of here for 30 seconds. And
yeah, Dave, I love it. You are a pleasure. You make it so much fun. And truthfully, it's really kind of good for my ego to see someone like you talking about all the different books. And I really appreciate it. Everyone, to your point, if you'd like to join me on LinkedIn, feel free. It's Paul Falcone 1 on LinkedIn. And my website is paulfalconehr.com. So anything I can do to help, just let me know.
No, that's awesome. All right, Paul, I'm going to be right back after this. Everybody have a great night and see you soon.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks.